let's just get started, shall we? So, fantastic. Okay. I'm just going to set a few things. I'm going to set a few things up. So, Deirdre, do you want to introduce yourself?
So, afternoon, everyone. It's really great to have you on our session. And as you can see, we've got just the video going in the background in terms of what we'll be covering today. We are looking at storytelling. So my name's Deirdre Jensen from Game to Change. I have been in the learning field for a number of years. And the creativity in learning is something that I'm extremely passionate about. Storytelling is really the crux of it. And we'll be sharing with you just what we've learned over the last few years, and also what we've learned in terms of recently of integrating storytelling into your e-learning design. And I'm going to introduce you to my co-host, Simon.
Hi, yeah, I have been working for Yoti for the last 2 years, mainly on gamification, but a lot of the gamification stuff does also include a bit of storytelling. So hopefully going to share some insights with you.
Great. So if before we start, if everyone could see that we've got quite a few people, if you'd like to pop your names in the chat and say hi to us, that'll be great. If there's anything you'd like to learn, if you could put that on the chat, we also appreciate it. Great. So why storytelling, and why are stories so powerful? So we have been, as a society, we've used stories for hundreds of thousands of years. And neurologically, it's actually proven that our brains are wired to take information through stories so much more. So they actually have done studies and shown that when information is packaged in a story, it has a 65% chance of landing, versus if it was just plain information, there's only a 6%. But I thought there's a really interesting way of getting this point across. And as we are in a storytelling workshop, I would like to share an actual experiment that was conducted in 2009 by a gentleman called Rob Walker, who was very interested in the power of stories. And he decided what better way to actually show the value of a story than do an experiment on eBay. And what he did was he purchased 200 random items on eBay. And some of these items were salt and pepper jars. One was actually, and why we've got it on this picture, is a horse's head, a porcelain horse's head. And he bought all 200 items for a grand total of $129. And what he then did was he approached 200 authors and offered them the opportunity to write a creative story around each item. And they were given creative license. So as an example, the porcelain horse's head was written about a family heirloom which they discovered that had been passed down from generations. And each item had a very interesting story. And what Rob then did was he actually posted each of these items, these 200 items, on eBay. And he sold 200 of these items for the value of $8,000. And that story really gives you an idea of how a story can create value and create meaning. And something as simple as a porcelain object became something so much more valuable when it had a story attached. So we can just see through this experiment the value of stories. But for today's session, where we'd like to focus is really on the value of stories in learning and just some practical approaches of how we can build stories into learning. So I'm going to hand over to Simon for this piece.
Yeah, so this is Bloom's taxonomy. This is something, if you are in the learning space, that you are familiar with. Essentially, what Bloom set up was this kind of layered step to the learner interaction, the learner's retention of knowledge, and how they're then supposed to use that knowledge later on. So the basic version for a learner would be being able to simply recall facts. This is very much the old way of learning, where you just have to remember a date of a war, for example. And it wasn't really engaging. It wasn't using the skills necessary. So Bloom kind of then worked his way up and said, well, what is the ultimate level? And that was essentially creating something, using the information that you have learned, using the knowledge that you have gained to create something new and something innovative. So this is kind of like your group work or your projects, anything like that. But what we think when it comes to kind of storytelling that we're going to discuss is we think it hits the middle section of Bloom's taxonomy. Being able to get information, being able to analyze that information, and then also being able to make judgments, being able to make decisions based on the information that gets given to you. So we want to kind of go on from this, and we obviously know all about storytelling, and we want to ask you guys a question. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take over from here, and I'm going to screen share if I can. And I'm going to start looking at, so can everyone see this? Let me just show me a hands up, Deirdre, if you can.
I can see it.
Fantastic. So want to get you guys onto Mentee, and we're going to be asking you guys a question. Where do you think storytelling has impacted the most with your learning? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you guys the link in chat. Let me just open this up here. We have so many participants, and this is great. So we'd love to hear from you. So there we go. If you guys can, just simply click the link that you have in chat. And then it's going to ask you to please enter a code if you guys want. The code is 71318937. So again, let me put that code into chat. So you can see here, if I enter this code, I'm then free to kind of prompt myself, and you guys can give whatever thought you have when it comes to this. So for me, where do I think the most impact of storytelling? I think engagement is probably for me the most impactful. But then let's see what kind of results we come to.
So there's something that I've definitely seen in storytelling, and just while you're jotting and giving us your feedback, it is very much making something relatable. So creating a story that resonates, and that message is just so much more powerful. So especially when you're wanting to challenge someone's beliefs or how they see the world, a story that resonates and demonstrates this is very powerful. So that's something that we've definitely seen in using stories.
Yeah, and there's a couple of interesting ones coming through. We have remembering. I think that kind of plays to different, obviously people have different ways they learn. Some people have photographic memory. I think remembering is probably a key point, because if we all, I don't know about you, but I remember the naughty elephant squirts water as a way to remember the compass, north, east, south, west. And that's a story in amongst itself, really. And that's a very easy way for me to remember it. Reflection's an interesting thing. How would story kind of impact reflection?
So I think storytelling very much taps into our emotion, our memories, and once we do that, we can also reflect. And if a story resonates with us, we reflect on if we've had a similar instance of it, and where has this been, or does it challenge something in us? And that reflection is really where a lot of learning happens. That's the aha moments, or that's the moments where we go into our own view of the world and maybe expand it or bring in new information through reflection. Certainly how I see it. I must see there's change management, definitely.
That both stood up to us. Yeah, definitely, because obviously with learning, you are wanting to either get information across to a person or maybe change their behavior. So that's where the change management would come in.
And there's a very interesting one. It creates rapport between the teller and the listener. Definitely, and something that we've also picked up, and what we've proposed is, how do you make, where you don't have the facilitator to bring a story across, how do you use your e-learning design to bring the learner into the story?
Exactly.
So we bring in a couple of tips
Yeah,
around
and like,
that.
if you have like maybe an icon, or, maybe it's a coach, and maybe it's a fictional person in the story, but you care about their response and how you decide what happens in the story. And I think that's quite interesting. But
Great.
we can move on a bit and start talking about the three approaches.
Great. So we've really, storytelling is a huge area. So there's a lot that could be covered. However, for this particular session, we wanted to focus on 3 areas where we've really seen it work well, particularly in e-learning design, and when you don't have a classroom. So the first one is narrative-based. And this is where you very much bring a story, but the learner is sitting experiencing the story from the outside. It's usually around motivation. It's usually around giving another perspective. So there's the narrative based, which Simon's going to speak on. You can see there we often have, we might have some realistic, but we also can bring fiction into narrative storytelling. And it's also about driving emotion and touching people's hearts in terms of the story. We have then also looked at more realistic storytelling with case-based, and many of you may be familiar with this in terms of business schools use actual examples that have happened in the real world and create a story around that. So it's far more realistic, and through that case-based method, there's a richness in the story with all the elements of the information, and it's a great way of then having a discussion and seeing some key principles come through in the case. And then finally, we will end off with scenario storytelling, and this is where we really put the learner central to the storytelling, where they have to actually navigate and make choices. The scenarios are written up as a story, and there's different ways this can be done. And through actually making decisions and choices, the learner is allowed to have feedback and reflection and learn through that process. So that's just a bit of a background to the 3 elements that we'll be covering and just where they fit in relation to each other.
Fantastic, but let's start talking about them. The first is obviously narrative. This is immersing your learner into a story, or kind of using a narrative story to guide the learner through the learning process. Essentially the learners are witnessing the story as more of an outsider thing. So some of the advantages of using a kind of narrative story could be that you're a hero on a journey, and you have to do these puzzles, or you have to do these learning these exercises as you're learning content, but you're using the story as a way of carrying the learners through this journey. What you can do with a story, which is really interesting, you can also use it to kind of frame what the learner is learning about. If there are morals or values that you want to get across, you might be able to get those across better using a story rather than simply saying, this is the value that you must aspire to. In addition, it helps, like I said, it acts as a kind of boat. It kind of guides the player along, so that it creates agency and urgency that the player wants to see what happens next. The player wants to see what will happen in the story. And really what's really nice about using a narrative is you can do a full-on world. You can create a full-on, it doesn't have to be something that they experience in their regular life. It could be a fantasy. It could be a spy thriller. And really you can immerse them quite successfully if you choose to go along this route. And we've seen a few examples of
something that I wanted to just say in that is always remember that your story and the theme that you select in your characters need to resonate with the learner. Yeah. So always understand their cultural background, where they're coming from, because if that story doesn't resonate, they'll lose interest immediately.
And what I might be saying might seem like you have to do this grandiose, sprawling fantasy of a story when it comes to your journey. It doesn't have to be. You can take a very simple concept of like maybe growing a garden as your narrative bed. But the 3 kind of steps to doing a narrative story is, firstly, you choose a theme that applies to the learner. I think this is the idea what you kind of said, is make sure it resonates with the learner, but also make sure it's in line with the content that you're dealing with. that there's not too much of a dissonance between the two. And then also a thing you can do is kind of plan out your learning content. You can see, okay, this is the beginning of what I need to talk about. And then at the end, when I do my portfolio of evidence, and try and map out a story to that. So here you can see a 3-act structure, which is something you're probably more familiar with when it comes to movies or when it comes to books. And try and map out your content to this. So the climax is going to be a big boss battle. It could be your final exam, whereas your first initial steps would be something much more simpler. And this is really what I'm saying, create a beginning, middle, and end to a story. But there's a few examples of narrative-based story. Firstly, Rebuilding Haiti. This is a wonderful interactive PDF that kind of guides you through the idea that you're a person that's rebuilding Haiti. And it asks you to make the right decisions, asks you to try and figure out what is happening and what you can actually do to help. And another thing we've been working on, this is Set Sail, Deirdre. Do you want to give a brief intro to what it is?
So really this was very much around compliance and understanding different legislation. And it could have been quite dry. So we looked at FICA, we looked at a whole lot of different legislative acts, and we had to get it across and understand it to a group of people in a big organization. And what we actually did was we decided that we wanted to bring in a fantasy element. And we wanted to bring in the element of exploring and excitement. So the story was there just to engage the learner. There were certain points where it came in. It wasn't scenario based, so it was quite simple in terms of that, but I can give you just a quick overview of the video which it started out with.
Cool, let's take a look at that video.
Great, so that's an idea. And basically, as they got to understand the different pieces of legislation, they also had some exciting elements of the story come up as they landed on different continents. So you can see how we took something that could have been pretty bland and made it exciting.
Yeah.
So this is how a narrative can be built in quite a simple way, just with using some graphics, some music into the actual learning process.
It does like help a lot. I have found, but we can now talk about the second approach, and that is the kind of complete opposite. You spoke about, I spoke about narrative, and that's very much fictional. Sort of a party adventure that we created, but now we have to go completely the other side, and that is talk about case-based stories. This is something you'll probably find in your learnings when it deals with like the medical profession or dealing with lawyers. And the idea is that you're telling a story mainly through cases that have already happened. These are real-world examples. And the learner is not necessarily examining the case, but they examine the case and then learning from it and making choices and decisions from understanding the case. So it could be a medical problem, and they have to see, did the doctor apply the correct medicine to the patient? Was the correct procedures followed? And then maybe there's a discussion afterwards. Often there is a facilitator that will guide them and try and give them more information about it. So I think one of the things we have to talk about when it comes to using case-based storytelling is it's generally for people with a foundation knowledge, because the outcome is the discussion that has to happen afterwards. And you need to have people that do know about the content. Using an educator is a great idea because they can help kind of guide the process, give them the goal, and also keep them on track. And also what's interesting about using a case-based storytelling is it allows for kind of better retention, because it's very easy for people to remember a case and to maybe not even recall all the facts, but remember at least what the outcome or what the discussion was afterwards. Anything from your side would you want to talk about when it comes to case-based, Deirdre?
Yes. So, I mean, this is used a lot in business schools. And I think it's not that when we think of case-based, and I certainly remember when I studied, we had those books of just text on a case base, and I really didn't enjoy that. But really making that case come to life, so putting stories in it. But I think key to this is it has to be authentic and real. So people need to, if you are using this as a learning tool in a case format, it needs to be authentic. It needs to have references. I mean, Harvard Business Review or Harvard Business Case Study Method is actually where it emanated from. You can really do this very creatively. If you are going online, you can have an interactive PDF, or you can have snippets of a video. I think the key thing is that the learner isn't, while the scenario, they are engaged in the decision, that the learning happens after the case has been presented, and you can have an online facilitator, discussions. And it isn't necessarily that there's a right or wrong. There's always shades of gray. So it's discussing what those shades of gray are. So Harry's just going to hand over to Simon just some tips to think about when designing a case base.
Yeah, I mean, we covered a lot of this, which is, firstly, you want to know what the principle, what is the outcome that you want your learner to achieve after going through the case, and also then trying to find suitable cases for the learner. And one of the things I would also say is try, and if it's going to be multiple cases, try and structure them from like the easiest to understand to the most difficult. So, you know, if you're dealing with law, for example, or criminality, it could be a simple parking ticket as your first case, all the way up until like some Sherlock Holmes, really clever deduction stuff. And then also, I think it's very important is make sure you find your facilitators or educators who are familiar with the topic or familiar with the cases, and who know how to carry out the discussion, know how they should guide the process. A few examples of some story-based, or sorry, I should say case-based, is the first world war. So this is a really cool thing that's case-based. This is highlighting 10 historians around the world and how they saw the First World War conflict. So what's really important about this, and as you go through it, you can click, let me share the link with everyone here, if I can.
Yeah, so this is very much where they narratively showed what happened in World War I, and they took clips, and you could actually follow it step by step. And the whole aim of using this in a case with a story was to actually demonstrate sort of that in war, no one really wins, you know, the actual devastation of this. And it's really well done. We'll share the link and you can have a look at it. It's in a public forum.
Yeah. And again, what you have is after you've gone through this, you would have your discussion on the 10 views. If the views were, you know, how were those views shaped, and understanding them. So perfect. Let's move on to the next one, the next example. And this is one of my favorite case-based studies. And this is called Project Musukuleka. And it's all about the fight for AIDS, or fighting AIDS in South Africa. And what really was is a selection of cases of how did they get the message across with social media, what type of medicine was used, what were the problems facing the kind of the medical staff that went in to deal with the problem. And really it's kind of tasking you at each step to say, was this the correct outcome? Was this something that could have been done in a different manner? And that's really cool. And again, let me share this because it is something really cool as a case-based example.
Great. So the third part of it is scenario-based, and this really is where you put the learner central to the actual story. And we're going to go into a little bit of detail because this is something that you probably will find that you're already doing it. And it is very effective. And I think especially when we are looking at e-learning where we don't have a facilitator, This is a great way of getting a more immersive experience. So very much the scenario-based approach is to allow the learner to actually come across certain scenarios and make decisions. And those decisions are then given feedback, and the feedback allows for reflection. I think something really important to note in designing, when you are designing scenario-based learning, is it can't be a right or wrong and you loop someone back to the beginning. It has to have nuances to be interesting, or people will get bored of it quite easily. So either you can do a branch scenario where they go off on a different to a different outcome and get feedback based on that. And I'm going to share with you how we did this in a sales scenario, and really understanding what are the tasks and what do you want to get the learner to experience and to reflect on. And you'll see I'm going to share just a couple of areas. So scenario-based learning really is very powerful when you want to develop critical thinking skills, and particularly in areas where it's not standard, where there could be exceptions, where you probably need deeper knowledge around it. And I've given some examples. So interpersonal skills could be one domain, and how do you communicate to achieve a goal? And you could have a customer service center, and you could actually take a couple of those anomalies that happen and create scenarios around that. So when things don't go according to plan, and get learners to experience that. Similarly with compliance policies and procedures, how do you interpret it? How do you interpret it in your environment? And this is really more of the deeper learning that you want to take people into. The same with troubleshooting. If you have software, it's not the standard procedure. You can do that very simply in a manual. It's the times or the scenarios where things go wrong and people have to make decisions, and there's not necessarily a right or wrong, but there could be a higher payoff for certain decisions. And similarly with team coordinations and how to deploy resources. So this is very much, as you saw on the infographic, it does require more time to write out, it does require more research, it does require more learning design, but it is very powerful in developing those critical thinking skills, which is becoming more and more crucial to how people operate and the type of learning they need to take on.
Yeah,
so
and
that's
I think
an example of areas where scenario-based can be used, but obviously this is not exhaustive. There's many other areas.
Yeah, because definitely I think it's, where narrative is completely fictional, like we talked about, and cases are case-based is quite realistic. Scenario is trying to use cases that may have never popped up or may have never appeared. It could be, say, a flight simulation, right? Not that we don't necessarily have all the cases of every single air crash that's happened, but people need to know what to do if something does occur. And this is kind of where scenarios really do shine.
So this is just some of the ways that scenario-based training can be delivered. So very much there's the branched, where you have a trigger event and you have certain scenarios that come up based on your choices, and it branches out and you reach a certain outcome. We've done a lot of work with the branch scenarios. This is a much more structured way of putting this together. And it is slightly simpler to design because there is a set path. The next one that you'll see there is a full screen active object. So this is often used, can be used with equipment, can be used with a role play where you see someone on a screen, there's objects, you've got to click on certain objects, you get information, someone actually comes in, requests. So it's very much, it's a more open-ended scenario, and you are given feedback based on how you perform certain tasks. So we've got given an example, and this might be you have to repair your very a trivial example, but a washing car wash, and something goes wrong, and you have to actually see what's happening and click under the bonnet or click on the panel, and then you'll get feedback. And then finally, there's the full virtual, which is very much where things are going in the next couple of years, where you actually can enter a virtual world and you can enter a scenario, and based on how you respond, you get feedback. So very, very immersive, very high tech. Obviously, requiring a lot of
this is
software
kind of like a doctor. This is kind of a doctor training simulation where they have to like go in. They have like a dummy or something. They have to go in and see what's wrong with the dummy.
And I know they're doing it for also customer service to make it a more real experience where you actually meet a customer and you have to do certain things. So this is very much the future of scenario-based training. But just to give you some tips of how to actually, and just a really simple model for the time frame that we have, is this comes from a really great book, and I'll also send the link through of how do you design your scenarios. And as you can see, you want to actually write up your task deliverable. So what is your learning objectives? What tasks do you want your learner to do? And then you need to frame it around 5 particular elements when you write stuff. So firstly, you have a trigger event, something that causes, that sets the scene. So that might be in a customer experience, you have an irate customer as the trigger event. You might have it in a leadership scenario-based training where something goes wrong in the team, a goal or deadlines missed, that could be the trigger event. You then want to give your learner the data, and you want to give the data in either scenarios and cases that they can get. In the open example, they might have to click on objects or speak to people, and then you want to give them guidance around what they need to do. So from that, they then make a decision, and there's an opportunity to give feedback of how they've actually tackled that particular task deliverable, and then there's a reflection opportunity. So it's very much scenario is great because it brings into place the double loop learning. So those are just the 5 elements of when you actually are designing, when you're designing your particular scenario-based storyboard around that. So what I wanted to show you is just and I'm going to give you behind the bonnet scenes, is we designed a sales scenario and we put it into various phases of the sales process. And these phases, we actually had to do research. We had to sit with various sales professionals, and we actually did a lot of work up front, and we collated it, and this is just the Excel spreadsheet. So we did the work up front, and we made each scenario have 3 particular variables based on how people decided to answer. So they had time, they had insight, and they had relationship. And it wasn't just gathering. So time, if you made a decision that could cause you to lose more time, but at the same time, that decision could lead you to gain more customer insight. So we actually did a whole mapping exercise, which took a bit of time. And then you'll see on the next slide, what we did is we actually designed these into cases. So there's a little bit of case study, and we wrote the scenarios out. So we actually first prototyped it in a physical setting and got feedback. And then from that, we took it into the online forum. And I've just put some shots up of that. And Simon, if you'll just share that.
Yeah.
Slide. So you'll see we gave the learner an idea that they'd be measured on time, insight, and resources. They started with 170 time tokens, and they had to collect insight and relationships. And basically, as they moved through those 4 phases, prospecting, presenting, closing, and follow-up, they had to minimize their time and also gain a certain amount of insights and relationship to move on to the next stage. So there wasn't a wrong or right, and you'll see on the next slide we have an example of they were given the case study. They had to get the main points. So this is the case data. They then got the actual prospecting questions, and based on them given the scenario, they could choose A, B, or C. And based on A, B, or C, they'd get a certain amount of time, resources, and insights. So that's just in a very high level how we put the scenario storyboard together, how we tested it, and then how we put it into an online and e-learning format. So it doesn't always have to be very complex and have a whole lot of graphics. It can also be quite simple and still very effective. And Simon, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about this particular example.
This is really cool, because this is it was designed as a survival app to help people, like if they're stuck in the wilderness, like what are some of the choices they could make in order to survive. And this is a very simple game, which I absolutely love. As you can see, there's no real major visual design to it. And it's simply just kind of guiding them through a story through different scenarios. So they get given a whole bunch of text, which is describing the circumstances in which they're in, and then they will have to make a choice. And at the end of the day, they get to see if they did manage to survive in this kind of made up world, or if unfortunately they didn't, which is really cool. But I think this is the kind of one that's more famous, though, which is Haji, Connected Haji McCall.
Yes, this is very well known. It's Kathy Moore. Yeah. I think quite a few people already know it. I know it was in Flash. And it's really just a great how they've used the comic book style for scenario based, which was really clever in terms of how it was done.
Yeah, because this was a military, this was essentially for the US military to help them deal with civilians in, I think, Iraq during that time. And you kind of had choices to make if you were friendly or if you were aggressive, and there were just different outcomes. And it again was designed to kind of train the troops, because they didn't really have any case-based stuff to work off, because this was something completely new to them. They were going into Iraq. So they had to come up with these various scenarios dealing with civilians. But we now have some time for another question or another mentee poll. So I'm going to go on and move on to the next one, which is quite cool, which is going to be, what is your biggest barrier in creating a story for you in your learning design? We want to kind of hear from you, because we want to help you, so to speak. So again, what's going to happen is we want everyone to go to mentee.com, and we're going to use the exact same code. So let me make sure that we can just copy it. Gonna get the code for you guys. There we go. And again, we're going to copy down. The code is 71318937. So let me go and put it in and see some results come through. Because I think we obviously talked a lot about, you know, the 3 different approaches, but this can sometimes be a bit overwhelming, I think. If you're starting a story, for example, if you want to tell a pirate adventure, how do you tell a pirate adventure? Like, what story do you write? It could also be things like trying to get your boss on board. I know I've struggled a couple of times to get Deirdre to agree with my ideas. And it's not always easy, right? Getting the people that pay the money to sign on with the thing. I see a lot of people, Deirdre, this is kind of the popular one, finding a theme or story that people like.
I think this is something we all face, and it's quite, when you're doing creative work, it's always a challenge. Is, you know, sometimes you want to go with what everyone makes everyone happy, and that's where we kind of sit in the zone. And we also have that, I guess there's a little bit of that hesitation. Do we go fantasy? Is it too far off? Is it too far removed? Is it going to take us away from our content? So there's always that fine line. And I mean, I definitely think that we faced it. I mean, in our Pirate Challenge, we got feedback. Some people loved it. They loved the fantasy element. Other people thought, no, it needs to be something more relatable. I think it's making sure that, and I mean, we do a bit of design thinking when we use learning, is to take a sample group and actually test that theme and say, does it bring you in? Does it engage with you?
And I think sometimes
we never took a test run with a sample group of learners, and we realized actually this thing might not work. So just something from our personal experience.
Yeah, because I think the big thing is, you know, as an educator, you're not the learner. So it can be very difficult to try and write for someone that you might not, and again, you might even not know who the learner is, right? You could be dealing with a whole bunch of primary school children, or you could be dealing with a whole bunch of like tertiary education people, and you have to try and teach them policy, but you're not the person that's learning, you're the person that's teaching, or you're the person that's educating. And I think that's where you sometimes find the struggle.
And I think something else to say is cognitive overload. So something you've got to be very aware of when writing a story is you don't want to make it too heavy or too detailed, because people are also learning through the story. So know how much is enough to keep people engaged without totally overloading them. And I think you also have to gauge where your learners are. You know, how much they already know. You don't want to put a case study and it's got wording or terminology they don't understand. So just be aware of that cognitive overload on taking a story and bringing it into your learning.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. So we have a couple of problems, obviously a couple of big barriers, but we've also been looking around, we've been trying to find our own solutions, and we're also trying to find a couple of solutions for everyone else to use. So we stumbled across two tools that I think are quite useful in helping. The first is elemental.io or elementary.io. This is a digital workbook where you can create digital books that can then be shared with people. What's really great about this is there's a ton of different kind of visual designs you can use to create your book. And it's really great as a kind of proof of concept, so to speak. You know, this is maybe not going to be your final outcome, but it's really great to be used as a selling tool to those who are going to be paying the money. But also, if you might be struggling like I am, is sometimes telling a story is really difficult. Where do I start? What characters do I use? Should I use characters? And what we found is Imagine Forest is a really nice site to use. This is where you can kind of tell a story or create a story, and then you're going to get community feedback, which is really cool. What's also nice about them is they give you a whole bunch of different writing prompts with various themes involved. So here you can see a nice pirate one. And it gives you kind of clues to guide you. What monsters would you find? What is the treasure that you're really looking for? And kind of gives you a few writing prompts to really help you. So yeah, these are kind of two tools that we occasionally use, and we do suggest them for everyone else. Some really cool stuff. But I think we can give you a couple more things.
So we've actually put together, there's 18 tools that we found on various sites that we think are useful. Some of them might be more useful than others. So we'd love to share those that toolkit with you. It also has 6 different story types, and it'll also include just a framework for writing branch scenarios that can help you with that. So if you are on LinkedIn, we'd love to get you to obviously just like our page, and you'll see the post is up there. So if you can go and like, and we will then send that through to you in a downloadable toolkit with a lot of goodies that you can take further into that.
And I think it's nice just to have it on hand, especially just as a reference guide, so to speak. It's a very handy thing to have. But I think also what we should say is, how can we help? You know, this is just a webinar. You may have, you know, blanked halfway through. Maybe some of the stuff you didn't understand. Maybe there's more stuff that we can help you with. Maybe you guys are writing your own stories that we can kind of give a bit of feedback in, because we like to hear from you guys. We do. We like to hear and see what you're doing. So what we're kind of asking really is to kind of get in contact with us, kind of see if you guys have any trouble or anything that you need help with, to let us know, right? We're always available. So I think what's going to happen is Deirdre will send you the link.
Yeah, the link's in the chat.
Okay.
So if you want to just book 15 minutes, there really is no obligation. We also just enjoy chatting and seeing what other people in the instructional design and learning space are doing. We can share with you a little bit of what we did with our set sail.
Yeah.
Also, some of the challenges we had. I mean, we had similar challenges around finding the right theme, what we learned from that. So please feel free. It really is just an opportunity and to engage with us. And we want to really just reach out to our community as well.
Finally, we have the excellence in learning design. This is something that we've been working on for quite a while now. And this is taking a lot of the information that we've been talking about in these webinars and kind of building a whole course around it to kind of give you some more information. So this is something that you can definitely inquire about. And we cover quite a lot of things in it. We cover how to identify your program objectives, how to create a learning journey. We also talk a bit more about gamification, which is one of our specialties. And also we talk about how to prototype. So how to actually put these stories that we've been talking about into a usable and workable format for everyone. Deirdre, is there anything you want to say on this?
So yeah, so someone asked me our link, our post to our LinkedIn page. I've just popped it in there. So if you'd like to go and have a look, if you'd like the toolkit, yeah, so reach out to us. Otherwise, we have we've really enjoyed engaging with you. We hope you found some value in sharing this topic. There's so much to it. I mean, we wanted to put a lot more in, but we thought let's keep to what can really just get you going. I'm sure you've probably also done a lot of storytelling, so hopefully it's also triggered some ideas. And all the best with your learning design in these interesting times as we make everything more engaging on the virtual world. And we'll definitely see you out there in the side of the virtual world. And yeah, if you want to get in touch and just have a quick chat, a coffee chat, no obligation, we'd love to meet you. Most times we just see as a name on the chat, so that does help. And have a lovely Monday and rest of the week.